Can I ask a question first? Just think about the car or vehicle that you use. Okay? Now, if you were to tell someone what vehicle you drive, what impression would they have of you? Okay? And then if you tell that person that you don't drive a car, what impression do they have of you? And then if you tell people what vehicle do you use and you say, oh, I ride a motorbike, everyone has a different opinion of you yet again. Yeah, there's a definition of a motorbiker that is that you take a canister of flammable liquid, you stick it above a hot combustible situation, and you place that between your legs in order to ride. Okay, and that's what bikers do. We're already on the edge. Okay, if that goes up, you know, there are issues. Okay, and I think that in many ways, depending on the kind of vehicle that you drive, is how we are in church life as well. If you say you're an Anglican, people automatically think this. If you say you're a Pentecostal, they think that. If you say that you're Methodist or Baptist or Salvation Army or Catholic, everyone has a preconception of some kind as to what kind of a person you really are. But have you noticed that drivers don't necessarily follow their brand? Yeah, people change cars, they switch brands. Have you noticed that sometimes you can get a good driver in a BMW and sometimes you can get a bad driver in a BMW? Okay, I mean, some people don't know what the indicator is for, and some people do. Some people manage to turn their heads and look out for other people, and some people just drive on regardless. Okay? I think that's what we do in church life. Okay? Now, I want to just the sense to you that churches in communities is just a different form of transport. Okay? In terms of the ecumenical and the interchurch and the ecclesiastical scene, we're just a different type of vehicle. We're not sure what it is yet. So it's quite fun to be said that I'm actually in an in from our tradition presentation, because we're not really sure what our tradition is yet. And I'll explain that. So we started in 1995. It came out of a minister's fellowship. Some of you might remember this guy, Hugh Osgood. He's the president of Churches in Communities. He'd been in ministry for 40 years before we started Churches in Communities. So he'd had a long track record of doing stuff in ministry as an independent minister before we even started this whole process going. In case you're wondering, he was a youth pastor at the time that he started out. You might recognise this guy. It's a very young-looking Noel Robinson back in the day. This was one of our ministers' gatherings. Another one of our sort of like gathered events, but a lot of it is about worship and so on. No, we're not like the way you normally do church. We are predominantly Pentecostal and charismatic. But it wasn't deliberately that way, it's just the way it happened. We did decide to have an evangelical doctrinal basis of faith, directly taken from the Evangelical Alliance. But not everyone understands it in the same way. They just have to agree that this is what they're going to abide by. And we have taken a light touch to policing it, because that's not what we're about. We're actually about trying to be different forms of church in different forms of community. Now, we're in communities, not community. It took me ages to get that one going. We started in the mid-90s. There was a big challenge. Some of you will remember independent churches. Oh, who are they accountable to? Who's really looking after them? There was a whole thing. Ruth Gledhill, religious correspondent at the Times, did a massive sting piece, really affected particularly Kingsway International Christian Centre. If you don't know who they are, the largest single congregation in Europe, and they're now currently based in Medway. I think they have something about 10 to 15,000 people through their door on a Sunday, and that's just their main church, not all their other branches. So that's just in terms of a single congregation type situation. They're not part of CIC, but they're an independent church. And part of what happened was an accusation against independent churches was, who are they accountable to? Are their leaders doing the right thing? Are they teaching sound doctrine? Are they fleecing the flock? Are they going off on unnecessary jaunts and taking the money to themselves and the glory? And issues around prosperity teaching was rife, and it was in the media and so on. And a lot of the small churches were saying, but what about us? It may be that they can handle the big accusations, but what about us? We're just trying to be a small church in a local situation, trying to get on with what we're doing, but we're facing the same exclusion. And so we wanted to find a way in which we could help people to be included. By 2010, we managed to get our charity number. I'd started working with Hugh in 1997, and by 2010 I'd worked with him enough that we'd actually managed to get CIC to get a charity number. Once we got our charity number, we then joined the Free Churches group, got our first prison chaplain in. We now have over 50 prison chaplains. We're now the largest provider from within the Free Church situation, having overtaken, and thank you to the Methodists for all that you did, because we definitely feel we're building on big shoulders in that situation. But we've also got people doing chaplaincy in healthcare, people doing chaplaincy in the armed forces, and it's become a real thing where we're saying it's not just about church, it's also about how do we take church to people who are excluded from being able to get to church, whether they're in a battlefield or a hospital, or a prison, or some other excluded form of community. So we wanted to take community of Christ to people. So in the communities rather than to, for, or at. Okay, so that's history. 2010 we get our number, and we were, I think, about 25, 30 ministers at that particular point. We're now somewhere around 350 accredited ministers throughout the UK. So huge growth, and has changed all our systems. I don't think we're quite at the growth rate of Redeemed, but we seem to be mirroring the early days of the Salvation Army in terms of our growth rate. So we're feeling that we're doing pretty well. 2010, we joined the Free Churches group. About 2 or 3 years later, after a huge amount of pressure, we finally were invited to join Churches Together in England, this august establishment. And it was about another 3 or 4 years after that that people asked us to start trying to join Churches Together in Britain and Ireland, that was going through a number of changes in its personnel at that particular point, and it took a while to get it sorted. The key bit for us was trying to get ministers together. It was about ministers, because many independent ministers get isolated. We can go to my next slide, please. So what we wanted to do was to help people with 3 key things: accreditation, recognition, and encouragement. But accreditation only is valid if it has accountability attached to it. So every one of our ministers, from the president to the latest new person in with a tiny church plant, has to have an annual accountability review. So that accountability is done by the members for the members. It's a peer review system. Recognition that they're actually doing good work as Christians in their communities is through representation. The reason that you know about CIC in any way, shape or form is because CIC invested in me being at all the interchurch and interfaith events possible. That was a deliberate policy on our part to actually say we want the independent sector to be recognised by people who previously didn't know it, our fear of the other, all of those kind of things. We wanted to do that. And then encouragement. We wanted to encourage people. I don't know whether you've noticed it in ministry, but the biggest weapon that the devil holds on to is discouragement. If he can discourage you, you'll leave the ministry. It's that simple. So we wanted to try and make sure that independent people, as ministers, had opportunities to get encouragement. So there's lots of fellowship. Next slide. Different types of, we have 4 basic groups of minister or ministries that are in membership with us, our members. Churches, fairly obviously. Chaplains, this is our latest group of army chaplains with the chaplain general and the assistant chaplain general. And the guy on the far left of the picture, Tom, is now a major. So he's done 5 years in and is our senior army chaplain. We have one also chaplain in the Navy and one in the RAF. Both of them Zimbabwean. The Navy chaplain is the first black Pentecostal independent chaplain to the Royal Navy in its history, which is just incredible that God would open up something like that. The RAF chaplain is white Zimbabwean, which is just hilarious when we sort of realise that this is what God is doing in our midst. Ministries, you'll recognise Noel, but we have a lot of different types of ministries. People who are doing non-church based forms of Christian ministry and outreach. And then we have networks. You'll recognise some of these as also linked into Churches Together in England, like sports chaplaincy. Waverley Abbey as a college, Urban Saints, many of you would know them. They've linked up with this World Mandate Ministries, actually comes out of the Caribbean. And Women in Tune, which if you go back one slide, The two ladies that have got the clerical collars on, I had the privilege of doing their ordinations. And the lady on the right, Valerie, she's part of this organisation, Women in Tune. She's just been to the Buckingham Palace Garden Party, and we've actually, her ministry is to support women who have suffered from female genital mutilation. One of the most hidden challenges in the UK, and it's just been so exciting to see someone taking that forward as a Christian ministry. So absolutely exciting. Anyway, move on. Next one. This is our split. We're not like most denominations. A third of our members are chaplains. A third of our people are doing forms of non-church-based ministry, and a third of our members, roughly speaking, are doing churches, with a few doing stuff in networks. Now, these are networks that are in some kind of association with us, and we're helping them to provide measures of accountability and accreditation and recognition for people that are doing ministry in their networks. And that roughly represents about 350 or so ministers at the moment. Next one. This is our UK spread. So you can see we're as far north as Inverness and Lossiemouth. We're as far west as Londonderry. We're as far east as Norwich. We're as far west as the southwest of Wales. And then we're down in St Ives and Culdrose, which is where our current Navy chaplain is based. So just a real geographic spread. We intended to only be relevant to London. We were called, originally we weren't called Churches in Communities. In 1995 we were London Cornerstone, because there was a church called Cornerstone Christian Centre, and the network of people that were attaching and linking up with Hugh, who was the pastor there, just called London Cornerstone rather than Cornerstone Church. So that was how we got. Globally, we're very spread out and very minimal. So these are groups that are relating to us directly from around the world. Uganda is probably the one that we had to let go the first. The idea was not that people would be relating to us in the centre, but we would let people be autonomous and independent and do their own thing. Within 2 years, Uganda had gone from being a couple of hundred ministers gathering in a tent to something like 35,000 churches. And there was just no way that it was worth relating to us. And that led to Uganda having the Born Again Faith Federation, and its leader is now one of the president's key faith advisors. So really exciting to see that we just pioneered something and then we're able to just give it away. Just let people be independent and run with it. Next one. I just want to say something about CIC, Churches in Communities, but also 3 core values: compassion, integrity and cooperation. The cooperation comes from the C scale of ecumenism. If you understand it, some of you may, I think I found it on the Methodist website many years ago. The worst form of the C scale of ecumenism is conflict, like the Troubles in Northern Ireland, for example. Then there's competition for souls. We're right, you're wrong. It's not really ecumenism at that point. Cooperation, we actually work together. We respect each other and we can tolerate where each other's at, but we know that we're different. The next level up is covenant, and then the next level up is full communion. We don't require our members to consider covenant or full communion. They're independent. We do ask them to get to cooperation. Okay? Compassion. We have to have the compassion of Christ. We've got to be people who have in mind the least, the last, and the lost. The Millennium Development Goals had in their midst that there should be a culturally relevant church within everyone's reach worldwide. The idea was that was by the year 2000. We're still working on it. But I think it's something that we need to do. How do we be relevant to areas of our towns and villages that are no-go areas? There's probably an independent church in there, because God's not going to abandon it. There's probably someone doing a house church in the street where there's been no church for a while. God's going to do it. He's going to raise people up. And then who are they going to be accountable to? How are they going to get their fellowship? How are they not going to be isolated? That's where CIC comes in. But then we have integrity. We are evangelical in our doctrinal basis. That does make us biblically traditional, and that makes us have values. And I think that we're not going to change on those because they matter to us, just as we wouldn't expect other people to have to change theirs. But that is a respect situation that needs to work both ways, and I think it's deeply challenging. How do you make sure that you can hold your integrity, ultimately to be accountable to God at the end of your working ministerial life, but also have compassion and to work with people in whom we need to try and see aspects of Christ, but we might not see the fullness yet? Huge challenges. We are in many ways totally diverse. We've never had a situation where we were anything other than a third women in our ministerial cadre. We've never had a situation where we were anything less than 60% non-white, non-Indigenous to the UK. And that makes for some interesting cultural exchanges when we have people who are from African or Caribbean or Indian or Filipino or English white or Scottish white backgrounds, where you're like going, okay, we just do things very, very differently. And there's a huge learning curve that we're on. So what is our tradition? I'm really not sure we're there yet. We've got some values and we're trying to live out Christ in the communities that he calls us to. So if you do know of independent churches or ministries that you think actually they could do with a little bit of a support, and you've befriended them rather than just rejected them, do introduce them to CIC, because there's been a huge amount of rejection in our history. Already, there are people who I've had to correct in open forum on all sorts of issues. And it's really difficult to do that, to speak out and actually say, your view is wrong. Your impression that we're uneducated is absolutely wrong. The idea that Pentecostals or charismatics have some wacky way of doing things. No, we're trying to be as close to the Bible as we possibly can. And I just want to encourage you that our hearts are towards you, but could you also have your hearts towards the independent sector, rather than in a sense of, we don't know them, we're scared of them, let's keep them out onto one side.